Welcome, Eliza. Absolutely lovely to have you
Hi.
here. Congratulations on your new book, Inheritocracy, why we should be talking about the Bank of Mum and Dad, which we'll
Yeah.
unpick a bit later. But more importantly, it made the Sunday Times bestseller list this week. So brilliant. Congratulations. You're an author and you specialize on generational challenges and issues and contemporary values, which is really about helping us all understand how societies changing through the prism of age and generation. So we're going to unpack some of that today, and with a particular focus on a little bit about what you've kind of gathered through your research and evidence, but more importantly, how that translates into the workplace. And especially when you've got intergenerational workforces and how businesses should be thinking about
Such a
it.
challenge.
Yeah. And we've started to face into some of this post-COVID, but actually I think it's becoming much more relevant now. I would like to talk about your book, your most recent book, Inheritocracy, and your previous one, Generation Shift, because that really does go about, so that talks about demographic disruption. And I just wondered if you would be willing to just share some of your sort of findings from that, or what really surprised you most when you were, writing those.
So I think, as you've alluded to in the introduction, we are all increasingly aware, thankfully, of difference and how critical it is in appreciating the individual. It's also including marginalised groups and also just creating a happier, healthier, and frankly more profitable workplace, right? And one aspect, one pillar of difference is age. It's the one that I obviously specialise in, and my currency is time. I analyse how society is changing and how people born in a different time either conflict or can work alongside each other in a profitable, harmonious way. And so looking at age diversity and looking at the multi-generational workplace is something that I've spent literally the last sort of 7 years doing. And in my first book, Generation Shift, which is a collection of essays born sort of in the aftermath of COVID, I sort of explore the way in which this multi-generational landscape has two elements, really. Number one, we are living in a society where we're going to need to work longer and where the generations coming in have grown up in a very different context to the ones who are leading that organisation. So there's a generational gap, and we're seeing that generational gap in families, in politics, and in the workplace. And I wanted to talk about the way in which that gap has widened, why that is, what the true story behind that generational gap is, because there's a lot of nonsense and stereotypes, and also what you can do to bridge it, essentially. And Inheritocracy was a kind of like follow on from that story, because that's about basically anyone under 45 has grown up in a very different economic landscape to anyone over 45. I use that as an artificial sort of point, but I think it's a valid one. So anyone under 45, so that's the millennials, Gen Z, have grown up in an economy where you were told, let's get as many of you to university, and getting a degree, there was this promise that you would be on this sort of route to a professional middle class life. But the fact is, the reality is, particularly post 2008, we've been living not in a meritocracy where hard work pays, but in inheritocracy, where basically it's not what you earn anymore because wages don't get you what it got our parents. It's not what you learn anymore because the value of that degree has gone down just as the price went up. It's whether you have access to the Bank of Mum and Dad, which is increasingly defining opportunities in life. And I wanted to explore why that happened, how it happened and how it played out in my life. It's partly a memoir, but also, frankly, companies need to understand that social mobility is a conversation that really needs to be had now. And also, we're living in an economy where, frankly, it pays to be more reliant on your parents, if you're lucky to have that Bank of Mum and Dad, than your boss. Who's more likely to get you a home, particularly in the Southeast? Your mum and dad, the sixth largest mortgage lender in the UK, not your boss, in a context in which wages don't get you what they got our parents. So in that sense, I wanted to tease out that story because that's the fundamental, we're talking about generational gap in the workplace. The thing I hear most, I'm sure you can relate to this, is people at C-suite level or people in their sort of late 40s, 50s going, why can't they work as hard as I did? Why can't they just put up and shut up and do what I did and work their way up and do all the grafting that I did? partly the answer is they've grown up in a different time when, frankly, and we can talk about this, technology has shaped beings in different ways. But also fundamentally, work got you a lot more in those days than it does now.
In terms of quality of life.
Just the basics. We're you know, as I say, anyone under 45 grew up in an economy where certain things became cheap. Technology, eating out, travel. 3 things that millennials and Gen Z love doing. They also grew up in an economy where certain things became expensive.
Yeah.
Childcare, education, healthcare, depending on where you are in the world, and of course, housing, both renting and buying. And so the big ticket items in life, wages weren't paying necessarily for, and the ones that have done okay are the ones that had the bank of mum and dad to trickle that money down and help them get on the ladder and fast track into adulthood. And so that's, you know, that's the economic story behind the generation gap, but there's also a cultural one, there's a technological one, there's a societal one. There's also, critically, a parenting one, which I can just dwell on for a moment because I think it's really important. Quite a lot of the time I go in and I say, you know, I'm talking to older C-suite or leaders in the business and they're like, there's no difference. Why don't they want to be me? Why? Which is so cutting.
Why would they want to be me?
Why don't they want to be me? What? I don't get it. You know, why are they questioning? Why are they always talking about work-life balance? Why are they always talking about... And I think it's important to first say that young people have always been criticised as lazy, entitled, and unwilling to work hard, right? You can go right back to ancient Greece and find evidence of elders critiquing their youngers. And likewise, young people have always critiqued their elders for being too conservative, too wedded to the status quo. So that's like let's just say that, once you're over 35, basically, you realise that you're slightly disconnected from people who are young. And that tension is part and parcel of, I would say, life. But there is a really important distinction here. And I think over the last 30 years, we've entered a culture of over-parenting. And families have got smaller. And frankly, also more and more mothers have gone out to work. There is a cultural shift that has happened in many households, not all. This is a broad brushstroke approach. But it used to be that there was a culture of deference in the home. And it used to be, of course, that, you know, children were scared of their parents, or certainly deferential to their parents. These days, I would say, certainly when it comes to my 7-year-old and 4-year-old, parents are scared of their kids. So the power shift that's happened in the home also is mirrored in school, and particularly at university. So it used to be that students were deferential to their professors. Now, I worked in higher education for 10 years. Not the case anymore. They're now customers. So now professors are deferential to their students because they're customers. And those students are taking that customer-centric ethos into the workplace. And then you add technology onto this. So if you're talking about Gen Z, who, by the way, I would argue are no longer that young, they're, you know, hitting their, you know, mid-20s and into their 30s, they've grown up with a smartphone in their pocket since they were 13. And what does a smartphone do? First of all, it's a megaphone. It's not a smartphone. It gives you a voice constantly. This is what I have for breakfast. This is what I'm going to work. This is what I do on my 5 to 9. This is what I do on my 9 to 5. But secondly, there's no deference on social media. You can call out the President of the United States. You can, you know, slag off an organization. There is no deference on social media. Everyone's shouting and everyone has a voice. You combine all of that and then plonk it in a workplace, which is frankly still built on hierarchy, built on age, and it's no wonder you've got a tension and a generational gap. And that's obviously the source of the sort of problems that I seek to address and help companies.
How do you think businesses can navigate that sort of that relationship with the future workforce to ensure that you, one, attract the best people or talent for your organisation? And I totally agree, social mobility is right up there, absolutely has to be. And then number two, more importantly for me, when you talked about culture earlier on, is enabling those individuals to thrive.
The recruitment point is a great one. And the social mobility piece is key to it. So if you want to recruit, and I'm thinking traditional professions here, you want to recruit the best talent, of course, But you also want to recruit the people that have got the hunger, the people that view your organisation as high status, the people that have got the commitment and are attracted to what you've got to offer. Now, the number one thing I would advise all companies to doing is stop lying about how great it is to work at the organisation. Right? If it's hard work, say it's hard work. I see a lot of like shiny websites and video production with high production values saying how great it is and how much fun we have in the office and how flexible it is. It's like, no, if it's hard work, say it's hard work. You're looking for people who have the hunger. So that's number one, is stop airbrushing, because they'll just go on TikTok and find the truth. And I think there's been a lot of that over the last 10 years. A lot of conversations around, come and find your purpose here. Perhaps you don't find your purpose. Perhaps you just find profit. And that's okay. So I think we can demystify the job. The second thing, and aligned to that, is that you've got a generation that is really acutely aware of buyer's remorse. You're seeing that buyer's remorse already in tertiary education, right? Saying, okay, you're going to charge me £9,000 a year. What am I getting? What am I getting for that? And it's the same with organisation. Okay, I'm going to come here and I'm going to give, my time, my life. I'm interviewing you. You're not interviewing me. Kind of dynamic, the power shift that I've already talked about. And you're seeing a lot of buyer's remorse. And you particularly saw that post-pandemic, where just companies weren't able to offer the socialization, the training, the commitment to their young staff. But I think there's a broader point here, and this is the social mobility issue, is that the people that have got the hunger, the people that will see you as high status, are the people invariably, not always, not in sup to the bank of mum and dad. Quite often they're the people that are funding and supporting their parents, right? And quite often they don't look like you. And this is key, because I remember talking to one partner at a law firm and she was saying to me, I had this amazing trainee and she was so sort of just so full of energy and positive. In fact, she reminded me of me when I was her age, red flag. And she was like, I can't understand it. Like, she left the firm sort of 6 months into her training contract. And I was like, oh, okay, what happened? She said, oh, she actually just really wanted to be a salsa dancer. And I was like, okay, why haven't you weeded out the salsa dancers in your recruitment strategy there? Because essentially what she was saying was, she was me 20 years ago, and I invested so much time, energy, and effort into her. And actually, she didn't have the hunger that you had 20 years ago. She wasn't you, actually. And you may have missed, through your unconscious bias, the people that did have the hunger, that did see the firm as high status. And I think that's the social mobility point, is that we need inclusive recruitment policies that frankly can weed out the salsa dancers and find the people with the hunger. And quite often, as I say, they are from more diverse backgrounds. They haven't been to the top universities. They haven't necessarily succeeded in the education system as we would like them to, because now the education system is so determined by the bank of mum and dad, which I delve into in the book. They may not speak in the way that, might not have the social etiquette and the social grace. But boy, do they have the hunger.
Yeah.
So I think we need to start datifying this stuff. Now, I know how we mark social mobility in our organisations is really, really critical. So, for example, if you ask me, where do you fit on the social mobility scale? Well, I'll say I was the first person in my family to go to university. That's not the most important point. Because actually, if you then say, okay, but tell me about your parents. My dad was a cleaner. That's not the most important point. Then you say, okay, how wealthy were your parents? I'll say, well, my parents bought 2 houses in London in the 1980s, and my father died a millionaire. That's the important point, because essentially what it meant was that although I was the first person to go to university in my family and my father was a cleaner, actually I had a safety net and a crash pad and ultimately a springboard in London. How are we measuring this point, because I don't think first person to go to university is necessarily the measure now. I think free school meals is definitely an adequate measure. So I would say, first of all, interrogate how you are collecting that data and how you're measuring things by, because it's becoming more complicated, is what I'd say, because of the assets of the parents. I'd also say that it's really imperative that organisations realise that they're going to have to adjust their induction procedures and support systems for their young people. Not just if you are pooling for from a more diverse network, but also think about what is it that they may be lacking that you maybe have assumed wasn't. Telephone etiquette, for example. Being able, a generation that's grown up answering the phone like that finds it really difficult to answer the phone like that and talk formally, like we all did, down a landline to our friends' parents before we spoke to our friends. All these things. And I said, I'd go back to having a suit, knowing how to tie a tie. I mean, that's all quite old school now, who wears a tie to work. But it speaks to the fact that we cannot make assumptions anymore about the knowledge base or the skills that we would like to see, or perhaps we had when we were their age.
In the context of sort of this generational shift and mindset shift, the fact that you've got an intergenerational workforce coming from different backgrounds, how do you see that sort of manifesting into leadership of that group of colleagues? What makes an effective leader?
So I think this is a critical point. We tend to promote people that are really good at their job. Not really good at managing people, as we know, right? And I think in the age of AI, the most important thing we need to be doing is humanizing the workplace. So we spent 20 years basically dehumanizing and digitally enhancing the workplace and dehumanizing interactions at work. And that was catapulted into a completely different realm during COVID. And actually, we're going to find very soon that all of that stuff can, to a certain extent, be done much quicker and more proficiently by AI. So what is it that we are really good at that AI can't do? And that's the question that I think needs to basically be at the heart of the individual and any company, and thinking about, therefore, we need to promote leaders that are good at three things. Number one, communication. And communication, as we know, is reciprocal, right? So it's speaking as well as it's listening as well as speaking. And I think there is there's a great deficit in communication skills, particularly in the under 35s that have grown up in a digital native environment. And whether we're talking about eye contact, reading body language, public speaking, hearing things you don't like, we've all as a society become really bad at listening. And so a leader that can communicate, not just get up on stage and give a nice speech and inspire the troops, but ones that are great at listening and articulating in a really clear way, I think is really, really important. It's going to become ever more important. And it's really important for your younger recruits, because one of the things that the conversations that are not happening in the workplace right now is worker flexibility being reciprocal. So employees are expecting, quite rightly, more flexibility. But are they being flexible to their employer? So a leader that can articulate reciprocal responsibilities within a team and within an organisation, the give and take, the push and pull that we all need to actually do to get things done, is really, really important. Number two, you need to be promoting great teachers. We do not promote great teachers. We promote great achievers, people that meet their targets. But if they can teach other people, that's so much more valuable than the lone wolf that can achieve the targets. And actually teaching is really hard and quite a unique skill, because what it requires, first of all, is listening. How much does that person know? And where can I fill the gaps? And if I start by going, this is what I know, I'm going to impart my wisdom and knowledge onto you, you've already lost them. You either pitch too high or you pitch too low. And so how can we reward and frankly train teachers? AI can't do that. And what's interesting, I say that confidently, knowing that all the data suggests that Gen Z, having grown up as digital natives, prize face-to-face communication more than any other generation. More than any other generation. So yes, they did their most interesting learning on YouTube. Yes, they expect video first learning, but what they really rate is that interpersonal, bespoke connection. And I say that as someone who taught in a university for a long time, saw the rise in fees, saw the customer-centric ethos amongst my students. And what was their definition of value for money? It was not, was the library open? Given. Did the digital stuff work? Given. Should be as slick as Amazon, thank you very much. Could they knock on my door and would I know their name? Could I deliver bespoke teaching to that individual? And a generation that's grown up with algorithm, individuation, frankly, expects it and prizes it in a human-centric way. So let's promote the teachers. And then thirdly, let's promote the carers, the empaths. Because again, I would say AI cannot do this in the way that we would like and the way that humans naturally can do. If we are encouraged and given the time to do it. And again, we have seen an awful lot of investment made on employee well-being. I think a lot of it, frankly, hasn't addressed the main issue. Because if your manager is walking around like he doesn't care or she doesn't care, frankly, that you're going to leave. That's the number one reason why people leave their job. Their manager's not a very caring person.
We talk about culture, belonging, inclusiveness. You've talked a little bit about the expectations of the different generations. If you've got any advice for boards, because culture is something that I hear a lot from my peers, understanding culture, because it's about the behaviours, how you show up, how you align behind the values, and how you succeed. Any advice for boards as to what sorts of things they might want to hone in on?
So there's two things really. Number one is time. Our diaries now look like it did in school. Bum, 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 bum. The number of meetings have increased by 150% since the pandemic. We are relentlessly overcommitted and under-socialised in the workplace. And that's not just remote working. Frankly, most of us, when we're in the office, are bum, 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 bum. And young people, if we're complaining our young people don't want to come to the office, frankly, A, that's not true. And because the real issue is within the millennial demographic who are challenging economic conditions, but also young kids, parents to young kids. The issue is the young people don't want to come in and sit on Zoom or Teams while their seniors are in other places. And so we need to create more time for socialization. And that is the lubrication for productivity in my view. And that also means nurturing friendships. Remember, work used to be the number one place where people met their partner. And we've lost a lot of the socialization and the time given over to friendship and interaction and mentorship and advice and wisdom sharing and all that stuff because we're bum, 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 bum. And so I think we need to challenge how we use time and how we think about time. And hopefully AI, I'm an optimist, will help with that rather than make it worse. The second thing I would urge all boards to look at is the changing nature of the family. Because most boards, and I'm generalising hugely here, so forgive me, are made up of breadwinners, right? Breadwinners, and mostly, frankly, male breadwinners. And in the 20th century, we had what was called a three-stage life. And Linda Grattan talks beautifully about this, which is, you had all your education done, and then you had this big chunk of life, which was working, and then retirement. And that was predicated on a model where, frankly, women did most of the care. And women have always worked, but that was the model that women did most of the care. In the 21st century, we have, so anyone under 45 in your office, by and large, is living, the majority of them are living in dual income households. And so we have seen women step up incredibly in the economic contributions to the household. For that to work, for that to be practical, for that to not result in burnout, that has to be equalled by another revolution, which is only, I would say, part way there, which is men stepping up in the domestic duties and responsibilities. Now we're seeing that emerging in terms of greater enhancement and support for fatherhood. But that's not the only challenge here, because we are seeing actually women having fewer babies, choosing to be child-free, having them much later in life and having them much closer together. So actually there is a gender pay gap, and it's increasingly becoming a pregnancy penalty. But actually the time that we're needing to look after young children, let's say preschool children, is actually becoming less and less. Where the bigger challenge is, and where few companies are really sort of talking about or dealing with, is elder care. And remember, we talked about how the Bank of Mum and Dad is the 6th largest mortgage lender in the UK, and so many, quite a few of people under 45 have basically been over-parented and over-supported, because they've had to be, by their parents if they were lucky. What happens when those parents get old? Now, in some cultures, in some families, there's a natural expectation that elder care happens and multi-generational households is how it is, and that's great. But the complexities of most households now is that we need men to step up as carers of the elderly as much as women stepping up as carers of the elderly, because the real danger is that your best female talent is lost to elder care when they hit their 50s and potentially even their mid-40s. And so we need, great that more men are paying, changing more nappies, but we need more men to change catheters. And care for the elderly, which I've done, before my father died, and it very much struck me, and I talk about this in the book, is my father said to me, "I'm glad I had 3 daughters and not 3 sons," which is gut-wrenching, but true, because women are not just carers of their parents, they're more or less carers of their in-laws as well. But the complication is they can't afford to be anymore, because we need 2 incomes. Secondly, we have, movement of people. Some families may be abroad, so how the complexities of elder care abroad is really a difficult, challenging issue. And also we're living longer, but with complex illnesses. So whether we're talking about Alzheimer's, whether we're talking about mobility issues, there's so many challenges looking after the elderly, and is of a much more protracted time than it was 20 years ago, and much more protracted than even looking after our kids. And frankly, the state is not going to stump up. What are companies going to do to help families manage that?
It's interesting, because I think some data that we have says that 75% of managers, not just generally, are millennials now.
Right.
Now. So we're already facing into some of these things real time.
I think what you've alluded to is a really important point here, is not just the family is changing, our work experience is changing. I think, only 17% of Gen Xers think that they will have a hard stop retirement.
Yeah.
And so that notion of just like, it's finished. So it might be the case for your partners or your seniors, but to what extent have you got a retirement plan or an attractive plan for your older workers that doesn't just mean a hard stop, but actually downsizing their careers in a way that is flexible, like people downsize their homes? And also, how many boards look at their over 40s and say, that's the future of my business? They don't, because ageism in the workplace starts at 40 for women, depressingly, that's me, and 45 for men. So we also have a real issue here, which is demographics. We're not producing enough babies, and we have lots of old people, to put it crudely. And we need to create companies where we are upskilling our over 40s. They are, because of AI and because of tech innovation, being de-skilled rapidly. But we need to be upskilling them as well. Yeah. So when I said, who do we promote, what makes a good leader, it's actually going to be the young people teaching and upskilling the older workers as much as the older workers upskilling and teaching the younger workers as well.
We've talked about AI in lots of different ways, actually. Is there anything else from your reflection that you'd like to just raise around AI? Because we've looked at it in different ways in terms of what it does to the workplace, how it makes us more productive, some of the worries about it. Is there anything else?
I mean, I think kind of where age intersects with AI, I think is really interesting. So some of the data suggests that actually the most enthusiastic about AI are Gen X, so those in their late 40s, 50s. And I think they're most equipped to deal with it in a proper way because they have the critical evaluation skills and the expertise to realize what AI spits out is either rubbish or great. And so we shouldn't assume that the digital natives know how to magically use it in a instructive way. I think actually AI is going to be one of those areas where that intergenerational learning piece is going to be really, really critically important. I also just want to give a nod to the next generation, Generation Alpha. There's a generation after Gen Z, which are, you know, my kids' generation. That's those born after 2010. And they are already using AI in their homework, right? Let's not pretend they're not. I was interviewing and doing a focus group in Brussels with a load of Gen Alphas, and this 14-year-old was saying to me, you know, I was sort of doing my Spanish homework and I was finding it too difficult, so I tapped into ChatGPT. You know, can you write the day in the life of a 13-year-old in Spanish, as if written by a 13-year-old? And he sort of smugly looked at me, and I was like, great. How did you do? And he was like, I got an A-. Did really well. And I was like, don't you feel like in any way you're compromising your ability to learn Spanish by using ChatGPT? And he was like, no, I'm preparing myself for the workforce. And he's right. So let's remember that the generation that is going to be hitting the workforce, not too distant future, Generation Alpha, probably going to be known as Gen AI, because they are going to be most exposed to it, are already growing up using it in education, but also have grown up shouting at Alexas and with on-demand TV, right? So everything that they're consuming and living is so algorithmically driven. It's going to blow companies' minds when they enter the workforce. And I think also, though, what we can do as parents and as educators is for that generation, really think about how can we keep them human in an AI-driven world.
Yeah.
What skills do we need them to learn? And, you know, communication skills, you know, being in your body, learning how to be, not just learning how to do. You know, there's lots of things that we need to be really thinking about. And I'm not sure the education system is wholly preparing them for the world that is about to you know, be unleashed on them.
So mental health is something that's come up in a number of your podcasts, right? Do you think mental health is a key differentiator between within generations, or do you not think it is different?
Yes, I've got number one is we need to recognise that work now, for most professions, hurts our head more than our bodies, right? We are living in the age of information overwhelm, and whether we're talking about emails, whether we're talking about meetings, whether we're talking about, you know, to-do tasks, instant messaging, whatever, it's overwhelm. It's overwhelm. Now, for the generation that has grown up with a smartphone in their pocket since they were 13, they were living in that age of overwhelm and information overload before they even knew who they were. Mm-hmm. And I think for them to trigger the conversation and destigmatize the issues around mental health is partly because of that, right? They are saying to us all, this is a work culture, and by the way, I'm talking about mental well-being within the workplace, burnout, etc., etc. This is a culture where there is no boundaries. There is few sort of respectful distinctions between work and life. We've digitalized the workplace where we are always on, and I've always been on since 13. And you know what? By the time I'm 21, I'm exhausted. And I think it's really important that people in their 50s understand, who perhaps have been, you know, always on for maybe only 10 years, but at least they knew who they were. At least they had probably some quite good boundaries or techniques to mitigate against that burnout in a way that, frankly, someone at 21 does not. But they're triggering that conversation quite right too. So it's not a trend, it's not a fad, it's not a snowflake sort of complaint. It's a legitimate kind of sort of conversation starter around the digitalization of the workplace and what it's done to us all. Now, what can we do about it? I think companies need to be, again, thinking about how our diaries, thinking about time spent together, thinking about what are we doing in terms of provisions to help our workers? Are we outsourcing problems? Or what are we empowering our managers to really help their teams deal with these pressures? And the fact is, HR departments are stretched, whether it's talking about menopause, whether it's talking about fertility issues, whether it's talking about mental well-being, whether it's talking about neurodiversity. And all these things are really critically important. But we also really need to recognize that companies are standardized. We can't offer bespoke everything. And particularly in a big organization or a multinational corporation. And I would say that the key to that is we can standardize this stuff at the top, centrally, but the real bespoke, the real personalization happens at managerial level. Not C-suite level, not leadership level, but a managerial level.
They're the great teachers of the next generation coming through. I absolutely agree with that. It's something that we think about quite a lot in terms of how do you empower people. So talking about the future, as you look forward over the next 5 to 10 years, what's your next book going to be on?
Give me a break if I can just finish the other one.
But your brain's already ticking. I can see. I know you. Your brain's ticking.
I think I really want to write something about Gen Alpha. I think they are going to be at the forefront. And I have skin in the game. Like, I'm a mother of a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. I really want to know what their future looks like and what we can do to prepare them for it. You know, that sort of rather old hat statistic that 60% of jobs that will be around in 10 years' time haven't been invented yet or something. And that is true. That's probably truer now than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
You're a busy mum.
Yep.
You write books, you write, and you're regularly blogging as well. You do your podcast. How do you sustain yourself?
Love that question. So that's a work in progress. So I have recently made a distinction, and maybe this will be helpful to anyone listening or watching, between the art of being, which is relaxing, and the art of doing, which is work. And the things that sustain me, the art of doing, work, and work isn't me, by the way, that distinction between what I do isn't me is really important. And frankly, and I'll be honest about this because I think it's important, is I rely on a lot of people to help me. The crew I have to sustain me is extraordinary, and I think we need to be more honest, particularly women in exceedingly privileged positions, which I definitely count myself in now. I have a crew of people that I either rely on for massive favours or pay. So that's how I sustain my work. And then being, because I think it's how do I be? How do I switch off? How do I just disassociate my professional existence and just be? That's like being in nature, cooking, and being with my kids.
Oh, well, look, this has been an incredible conversation. I just think the advice you've given for leaders and boards around allocation of time and use of time, socializing as much as work, as much as friendship, rekindling that humanization within the workforce is really important. And the second one, recognizing the changing nature of families. And we're seeing that manifest in the nature and style of individuals, depending on the generations and how they lead, how they inspire. What a fabulous insight into the world of generations. I mean, but actually just understanding difference. It all comes back to what you said at the beginning. It's about difference, understanding difference and embracing it and working with it. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.